I nearly drowned 2 weeks ago, and it changed my life. My family moved out to Mercy Shores recently. It's a little peninsula down in Washington, with 2 hardware stores, a Walmart, and not much else. Mom and Dad grew up in San Diego, amongst the hustle and bustle of city life, and decided they wanted to retire somewhere a little quieter. I had been their last child, a total surprise to both of them at 40. Now that they were 55, they felt it was time to retire and enjoy their golden years. So they moved me 400 miles away from my friends, my school, and anyone I had ever known, so they could enjoy those golden years. We moved into a beach house of sorts. It was a 2-story, the second floor a loft that overlooked the ocean out of a big round bay window. They gave me the loft and took a larger room downstairs with a less spectacular view, knowing I was not happy about leaving my friends behind. I guess my parents were trying to placate me, so I set up my meager possessions that I'd brought with us, the moving truck being a couple of days behind. As I set about finding a home for things, I found myself drawn to the big bay window that overlooked our little stretch of beach. The shore was far from picturesque. Not quite as pretty as the California beaches, Mercy Shore was stony and a little bleak looking. I didn't doubt the water would be cold and clear, but it would also likely have rocks, and maybe crabs scuttling underfoot. There was a tall jut of rock just off the coast, about 50 feet from the shore. I found my gaze drawn there again and again. It looked like nothing so much as a tall throne, fit for a giant. The seat was smooth from many tides. I almost thought I could see a little hollow in the back of the throne. The throne wasn't quite large enough for caves, but there was a narrow fluted passage in the throne's back that would likely fill with water when the waves crashed over it. Those waves woke me up that first night. The crashing of the breakers jarred me awake. I realized that they were so loud because I'd left the window open. As I slid it shut, my eyes were caught by the moon as it cast its glow on the stone throne. As I closed the window, I saw something moving in the water. The lean shape crested up and out of the water like a sea serpent, and as it came up, I could see it was a girl. Her hair was long and silvery and lovely. She ran her fingers through it as I stared at her, and she seemed to feel my gaze as she floated like a specter in the dark water. She looked up at me, her smile wide and inviting, and waved a single pale hand at my window. I waved back, and when she slipped under the water this time, she didn't come back up. When I woke up the next morning, I convinced myself it had been a dream. The next day, Mom and Dad wanted to go antiquing in town. I told them I didn't want to go, and they didn't act too put out by my refusal. It was pretty clear they didn't want a complaining teen tagging along and ruining their trip. I waved to them from the front porch as they left before moving upstairs to relax a little. I sat in the window seat of my new room, reading and watching the waves crash, when I saw some people walking down with blankets and coolers. They started setting up their stuff, and I noticed most of them looked around my age. On a whim, I decided to talk to them. What was the worst that could happen? I slipped on a pair of comfy shorts and headed out. The beachgoers tensed when they saw the door open, but they relaxed a little when they realized I wasn't an adult. I introduced myself and learned that they were Matt, Stuart, Kyle, and Roger. They had apparently been coming to this beach for quite a while and said it was a favorite hangout spot for them. Sorry for intruding. Throne Beach has been empty for years, and the old lady who used to live here always let us play here when we were kids, Matt explained. Matt looked like he'd be at home on any California beach. Board shorts, long brown hair cut in that way that's half bowl cut and half natural, a surfboard next to his blanket, and a smile for anyone. Stuart was tall, gangly almost, with buck teeth and thick glasses. He was very pale, and I got the impression that they had dragged him out from under a rock to hang out with his friends. Kyle and Roger looked like a couple of classic Chads. Snap brim hats, sculpted physiques, gold chains, board shorts, the works. They slapped my hand when I went to shake theirs and roared with laughter when I looked a little confused. We became friends in that effortless way teens often do. I hung out with him for the rest of the day. We swam, the water was cold and stony, as I had thought it would be, and played frisbee with a big red disc that Roger had brought. I invited them in for lunch, and we sat on the blankets and munched cold sandwiches and chips. The sun was starting to work its way across the sky as we ate. I noticed that mine wasn't the only eye drawn to the big rock out there. Matt was studying it intently as he ate, and it almost seemed like he was looking for something out there. "It's pretty cool," I said, taking a bite of bologna as he looked over at me. "The rock, I mean." Matt nodded. "Oh, Matt just thinks it's cool because he thought he saw a girl out there," Roger crowed. Matt shot him a murderous look, but I was interested. "A girl?" Matt blew out a big long breath. "Well, it happened a few years ago. I was out here swimming with Kyle and Roger, and the waves were a little rougher than I thought they were. We had all been daring each other to swim out to the rock and back. We had all done it since we were young. I was on my way back, and a huge wave crashed over me and drove me under. I kicked my legs and tried to right myself, but the waves kept crashing down. I was underwater, running out of air, and as my lungs cried out, I felt hands catch me. Someone lifted me and swam me to the shore. I was on my knees, hacking up water and struggling for breath. I looked back at the water and saw a girl swimming away. Kyle and Roger came running up then, and when I looked back, she was gone." Kyle snickered, but I was curious. "What did she look like?" "She had long hair, maybe blonde or silver. She looked young. I remember thinking that she was about my age. Her hands felt strong but cold, and I've been keeping an eye out for her ever since. I keep hoping maybe she'll come back." His eyes glazed over a little then, and he stared back at the throne-shaped rock hopefully. I heard my dad honk the horn on his old truck then, and my new friends turned to see my parents coming up the drive. They had some furniture in the back of the pickup. As Dad got out, he called me over to help him move it. I said my goodbyes and went to help, but found all four of them following behind me to my surprise. We had the furniture inside faster than expected between the five of us, and I introduced them to my parents. Mom asked if they'd like to stay for dinner, holding up a takeout Chinese food bag. "I can get some more. The place next to the antique shop smelled so good that I just had to have some." "Maybe another time, ma'am. We don't want to intrude," Matt said. He held his hands up, and I slapped it as he promised that they would see me tomorrow and see if I wanted to hang out. They cleaned up their stuff, and after another round of goodbyes, they hopped on their bikes and rolled into town. Mom smiled. "Making friends already, I see." I smiled back, realizing I had done just that. We sat around the table and ate as they told me about their day. My parents talked about the antiquing. The stores in town had a large selection, and Mom was in love with several other pieces. I told them about my new friends, and they agreed that they seemed like nice boys. I told them how lovely the beach was, and Mom said she had gotten a call from the movers saying that they would be here tomorrow afternoon with the stuff. "Maybe your friends would like to help you set up your room?" she asked. Turned out, they did. I spent that summer hanging out with my new friends. We had moved at the very end of school, and next year I would be starting 10th grade at Mercy Shores High. Matt, Stuart, Kyle, and Roger would be starting 10th grade as well. We had many of the same classes, and as the summer slipped away, Matt proposed one last beach day to celebrate the end of summer. "It's the last really warm day before fall, and we should take advantage of it." It was a great day. The sun was hot, the wind was breezy. Dad had set up a grill and was cooking hot dogs and hamburgers. Mom had found the badminton set, and we were using it to play volleyball. Mom agreed to play with us, to round the teams out, and she turned out to be really good at it. Roger, Stuart, and my mom creamed Kyle, Matt, and I 3-5, and we decided to swim a little after that. We took to the water like a school of fish, and Kyle suggested we swim to the rock. "Come on, Kyle, let's not," Matt protested. "What's the matter, Matt? You chicken?" Kyle teased. "I'll race you," I said, starting to swim for the rock, as Kyle cawed angrily and lit out after me. You don't realize it from the shore, but the rock is pretty far out. It was about 30 feet from the beach, and you just don't really realize it till you're there. I had swum to the rock before, we all had, but it's never the same trip twice. I swam hard, tearing up the surf as I went, and when I got to the rock, my arms were burning. I hung to the side of the rock like a barnacle, catching my breath as Kyle closed the distance. When he was about 3 feet away, I dove back into the water and started swimming hard for the shore. I heard him yell, but I ignored him, paddling hard as I made for my friends who were bobbing near the beach. That was when something grabbed my leg. At first, I thought it was a fish that had just wandered too close, and I kicked my foot out to shoo it. When it wrapped its squishy hands around my leg again, though, it tugged me down with a strength I hadn't felt before. I was pulled under the water, dragged beneath the waves, and as I went below, I felt the air rush out of me in surprise. I kicked out, but whatever had me was fast. It dodged out of the way of my kicks and continued to drag me into the blackness below. I opened my eyes, trying to see what it was, and I was transfixed for a moment. It was a girl. It was the girl. Her hair plumed around her like a halo, and as she noticed me noticing her, she smiled at me. For a moment, it seemed like her mouth was too full of teeth, rows of needles that gleamed in the murky depths. She tugged me down, but now I very much did not want to go. I kicked again, but I was losing focus. I needed air. I was losing consciousness. As the blackness swam up before my eyes, I thought for sure I was going to drown. Then, something grabbed me under my arms and tugged me free. The next thing I was aware of was someone giving me CPR as I coughed and gurgled on the beach. Mom's face swam before me, and she smiled in relief as I came back. I sat up, still coughing, and heard someone in the water yelling for Matt. Kyle was beside me, apologizing profusely as I choked out the last of the water. I looked around and saw that Stuart was yelling at Matt as he dived under again and again, searching for something. I coughed up some water. What's wrong with Matt? Kyle looked out and sighed. He went out to save you. He dove to get you, but he came up talking about a girl he'd seen. He said she had you by the leg, and after he put you on the beach, he went out to find her again. Dad called the festivities shortly after that. Kyle and Roger hauled Matt out of the water, and the four left after saying goodbye and telling me that they were glad I was okay. Matt didn't say much of anything. He looked dazed and confused, and kept looking back at the water as they led him back to the bikes. I knew how he felt. I found myself drawn to the water after that. If I had a spare moment, or even if I didn't, I would sit by the water and listen to the waves. I couldn't get her out of my head, that beautiful creature that had grabbed me. Why had she grabbed me, I wondered. She had seemed intent on showing me something underwater. Did she want me to see something, maybe? Matt started coming around a lot more. Not to see me, not really, but I think he wanted to be close to the water too. I caught him down by the water at night sometimes, sitting by the shore or sitting by the beach. He never brought anything. It was always just sitting in the sand and staring at the water. Dad came out and shooed him more than once, and he told me to tell Matt not to sit out there at night a few days later. He could get hurt out there, and I don't want to call the cops on him for trespassing. That was the night I heard the whispery voice coming from the beach. It came through my window and seduced my ears to wakefulness. I sat up, listening, hearing a returning voice that was much less musical. It was no less familiar, though. When I looked out on the beach, I saw that Matt was on the shore and talking with someone. The someone was in the water, and by the sound of it, they were trying to coax him into the water with them. He looked back towards the road, his bike a shadowy hulk on the street, and then again at the speaker. He said something too low for me to hear, and when they returned to that sweet honey sound, he walked into the water, and I heard him splashing as he dove. I ran from my room and went softly down the stairs. I was worried about him. He was a strong swimmer, but the waters at night were likely dangerous. I came out onto the beach, whispering his name so as not to wake my folks up. I went to the edge of the water and scanned the dark ocean for him, but he was nowhere to be found. He had been there only a moment before, hadn't he? I spent a few minutes searching for him before finally heading inside, thinking maybe I'd been dreaming or something. That was when I heard the voice. "Hello, handsome." I turned back to the water. I'd heard a feminine voice speak, heard it plain as day, but all I could see was the black waves as they churned endlessly. It was dark out there, too dark, and I didn't think that anything could exist out there in that blackness. "Not leaving already, are you?" the voice asked again. It was closer now, and when I looked, I saw a silver-haired girl sitting on the shoreline. It was the same one as before. She was dressed in a green dress, the color of seaweed. Her hair was long and silver and hung wild around her, shimmering wetly in the moonlight. Her skin was like porcelain, so white and flawless, and her face looked like a carved mask made of flesh. Her hands were on her knees, and when she turned, she smiled at me with the most beautiful set of perfect white teeth. She was breathtaking, the most beautiful woman I'd ever seen, and as she tugged at my legs, trying to get me to sit, I did. "What brings you here so late?" she asked in her whispery voice. I thought my friend was here." "No one here but me and you." Her silvery hair danced in the moonlight as she shook her head. "I saw you the first night I moved in here," I said, not knowing why. She nodded. I wanted to say hello. Now it seems I have. I don't know how long I sat there, but it was the best night of my life. We talked for hours about nothing at all. She absorbed every word I said, and I basked in her ephemeral beauty. She was a goddess, her skin lacking blemishes or faults, her hair a perfect sheet of silver. We talked until the sun came up, and I remember her looking at it and giving it a little hiss. Come see me tonight, handsome, she said sweetly. Wait, where are you going? Home. I'll be back tonight. Then she kissed me, and my whole world trembled on the edge of breaking as her lips pressed against mine. When I came back to myself, I was lying on the beach. Matt's parents showed up the next day around lunch. Matt had apparently been missing since last night. They were worried about him because he hadn't been acting like himself lately. He hadn't been eating well, his sleep had been fitful, and they had often woken up to find him gone at night. Matt's father had found him on our beach many times, curled up in the sand, and they had hoped they'd find him here today. My parents said they hadn't seen him, and I said the same. It wasn't a lie. I hadn't seen him after all. I'd seen the girl, the most beautiful moonchild, but any thoughts of my friend had fled my mind after that. They left to see the sheriff, and Mom bemoaned the luck. She asked if I was sure I hadn't seen him last night, and I said that I hadn't. After lunch, I went up and took a nap. I wanted to be fresh for her tonight. I met with her every night that week. I came up after sundown to find her sprawling on the beach waiting for me. We talked for hours, locked in each other's eyes. Her face was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen, and she seemed to hang on my every word. Thinking back, I don't think she spoke much at all. She wanted to hear about my life, my friends, my hobbies, books I'd read, and anything else that mattered to me. She always left at sunrise, kissing me and leaving me dazed and confused. In town, Matt's disappearance was big news. The sheriff had talked to us a few times, wondering if any of us had seen him. The state police were searching everywhere. Every friend he'd ever had, anyone who could have any contact with him, and every place he might have been was searched and searched again. Knowing him to be a swimmer, they were scuba divers combing the ocean, but their hopes were low of finding him if he'd gone into the water. I was in a daze. My waking thoughts were of the girl, the lovely girl, and when I would see her again. Kyle tried to get me to come looking for Matt with them, but I was always too tired. Mom wanted to take me school shopping, but school just didn't interest me. I was in love, I was in lust, and I wanted nothing but my porcelain goddess forever. My haze held until one day, when they found Matt. Kyle came slamming into my room, rousing me from sleep and saying we had to go. What? Kyle, it's too early. I want to sleep. It's 12:30, dude. Get up and come with me, now. He threw clothes at me as I groggily got out of bed. What's your damage, man? Why the sudden rush? We found him. My blood ran cold. You found Matt? What's left of him? Stewart's got the sheriff, and Roger's staying with the body. I need you to come say your goodbyes before the media circus hits. If you even want to say goodbye. I put my shirt on, glaring at him owlishly. What's that supposed to mean? Kyle glared at me. You're acting just like him before he disappeared. You don't want to hang out. You don't even want to help us look for him. So I'm assuming that you already knew he was missing. I don't like what you're insinuating, I said, starting to get angry. You seemed like a good guy when you first moved to town, but now I'm not so sure. You know something. Maybe not all of it, but you know something. Now either come with me or don't, but either way, it's the last time you're ever going to see him. It's also the last time I want to see you. I got dressed and followed him. Matt, it turned out, had washed up on the beach about 5 miles from my house. Well, what was left of him had washed up. His arms and legs were picked over stumps. His eyes and nose were gone, ditto for his lips and ears. If he hadn't still been wearing the t-shirt that Roger had given him for his birthday a year before, no one would have known it was him. He was a torso, picked over from head to toe. When we got there, Stewart and Roger were nearby, both of them crying. The sheriff had shunted the two boys away, and as we approached, he raised a hand to stop us. No closer, boys. I appreciate you finding the body, but I need you to stand back. Kyle told the sheriff how they had found the body while riding along the road. We were going to the corner store when we saw him. We thought he was a dolphin that had been washed up until we saw the t-shirt. That's when we came to get you. The ambulance came and took the body away. I remember looking at him under that white sheet and still being able to see his eyeless face. I realized I'd been living in a cloud the whole time. I needed to find out what had happened that night, and only one person knew for sure. After dark, I went to find her. She lay waiting for me, the same as always, but when I didn't sit, she seemed worried. "What's wrong, handsome? You seem upset." I took a deep breath. "What happened to Matt the night we met?" "Who?" she asked, but her voice didn't seem right. "My friend, Matt. I think you'd been talking to him just like this before he died. I think he went into the water after you that night, and now his body is sitting in the morgue, half-eaten." I took a step back from her. "Handsome, I don't know who this person is. Why don't you come sit with me? You can tell me all about them." She patted the sand, and for a moment I saw a hand the color of algae. I saw a hand with webbed fingers. She must have noticed, because the hand was normal again just that fast. I took another step back. "Why did you save him all those years ago? Why did you save him from drowning if you were just going to kill him?" She looked down, her hair making a sheet in front of her face. "He wasn't ready yet." That sent a shiver through me. Ready? Ready for what? When she looked back up, her face had changed. Her eyes were like onyx stones. Her nose had become a snake's slit. Her teeth were rows of sewing needles, and her grin looked ready to split her full rotten lips. The dress wasn't a dress. It was her shimmering scales, and as she moved, I could see a tail like a carp's attached to her. Her whispery voice was now like a hook dragged across a rock. "We needed his seed. Our men are gone. There's no one to hunt for us. We must make some more. We have to create the next generation." My feet were moving backwards now. "You killed him for his... We needed his seed. We needed his meat. Once we were done, we gave him back," she said, her teeth fixed in a lazy grin. "I don't want to see you anymore," I said. "You're not the person I thought you were." I was 12 feet away, but I heard her final words on the subject. "You can't turn from me, boy. I swim in your veins now. You can't deny me any more than he could." She was right. Even as I walked away, wanting to run, I felt my feet trying to go back to her. I had to make myself go inside. I had to make myself go into my room. I had to make myself close the curtains and try to resist the urge to go back to the beach. Writing this helped, but I can't stop thinking about her, even with my mind so distracted. She's never a monster in my memories. When I think of her, she's always the porcelain moonchild I met on the beach. She's always the sweet girl whose lips were sweeter still. She's always the subject of my infatuation. I peeked out my window several times. She's out on the rock, sitting on the throne, singing to me. Her song is for me alone, and I know that I will go to her despite my best efforts. Even now, I feel like a swim. Even now, I feel myself wanting to swim to her. Even now, I feel myself wanting to see what she has to show me in the deeps. I opened the mailbox and started shifting the mail around to see what today's bunch of crap was. Bill, credit card offer. My hand froze as I looked at the envelope, my jaw quivering a little as I read the address on the front and the name of the sender. This hadn't happened in years, not since I'd left college, but I'd felt safe enough to settle somewhere, hoping that the letters had stopped. It had been 3 years since she'd written, but it made me feel like I was a teenager again, fearing that anyone but me would find those letters. From Catherine Mansley to Justin Mansley. "Dear brother, it's been so long. You should come see me in the blue. Love, Catherine." I tore the letter up and went back inside, trying not to notice how the paper had made my fingers feel clammy and moist. The envelope, too, had been the same way, moist and difficult to hold. It was like wet paper that had
tried badly, but it was always that way. When Catherine sent me letters, they were always like that. I had kept them at first, hiding them so no one would find them, but I burned them now, not wanting them anywhere near me. I picked up the phone to call Daniel, but it went straight to voicemail. I tried to call my uncle, but Uncle Mike was hoping I had seen Daniel. He said he'd been missing for a week now, and everyone was getting worried. I can hear him calling me now as I sit on the floor with my knees against my chest, trying not to hyperventilate. But I know it's useless. That feeling is the closest I can come to drowning, the closest I can come to understanding why Catherine writes these letters. Daniel, Carter, Clint, Henry, they're all gone now. I'm the last one that Catherine hasn't got. When we were kids, or early teens, we would all stay at Grandpa's cabin over the summer. Grandpa was long dead, Grandma too, but the cabin was always called such. My mom and dad would usually come up first to get it ready, and I loved the time before my cousins got there, the times I could just enjoy the cabin. I haven't been back in years, not since we went back for Clint, but I can still remember the cabin. It was more of a lodge than a cabin, and Dad claimed that Grandpa's dad, our great-grandpa, had built it by hand. It was made from the huge old trees in the area, and it had a big area downstairs with 4 rooms above it. The rooms were easily as big as hotel rooms, the Motel 6 kind, and they held our family and the families of my cousins easily. Dad had a brother, Uncle Mike, and a sister, Aunt Claire, and both of them had 2 kids. Catherine was the only girl in the family, other than Aunt Claire, and the youngest. That meant she tried extra hard to keep up with her older cousins, and it often led her to trouble. The time she fell out of a tree and broke her arm, the time she'd bruised her legs and butt jumping her bike over a 15-foot drop, the time she'd nearly drowned at Carfer's Pond, were all times she was trying to keep up with us. We were merciless, too, giving her no quarter, and it must have been miserable for her. We loved to hike and swim and spend time in the cabin, but the thing we all looked forward to seeing the most when we came out here was the blue. The blue was a hole in the woods, more like a pit than anything, with water inside that was perfectly blue, like the stuff inside the jar where the barber keeps his combs. It went 30 feet into the earth, the precipice sheer and easy to stumble into if you weren't paying attention. The water inside was so blue that it hurt your eyes if you looked at it for too long, and it always looked artificial to me. Someone had hung a bridge over it, a rickety thing that swung across on ropes, and my cousins and I thought it was great fun to go and tempt fate by bouncing on it and making it sway. Thinking about that now makes me downright shudder, but all kids think they're immortal. I was 12 when it happened, but it could have happened before then easily. We'd been at the cabin a week, swimming and fishing and generally enjoying our time in the woods, when Clint said he wanted to go see the blue today. He said it quietly because if he had said it any louder, his mom or my mom would have heard, and that would have been the end of it. All the adults knew about the blue and had forbidden us to go anywhere near it. Dad had told us stories about playing on that bridge when he and Uncle Mike were kids, but Aunt Claire had always been too scared to go on that rickety old thing. I think my dad knew that we were going to go out to the blue, probably expected it, and never expressly forbid us to go there, unlike my mom. He knew that forbidding it would just make it more enticing, and if he let us get it out of our systems, the blue would become boring, all on its own. I don't think he believed something tragic would happen, but if he had, he might have kept a closer eye on us. We told our mothers we were going on a hike, Uncle Mike, Uncle Dale, and Dad having gone fishing that morning, and they said that was fine, but to be back by lunchtime. We made our way out as quietly as possible, thinking ourselves clever for not letting Catherine hear us. But no sooner had we jumped off the back porch than here she came with a "wait for me." Clint grumbled that we should just run off without her, but that was when my mom poked her head out and told us not to forget Cat. Catherine seemed pretty pleased with herself as she followed us out of the yard, and as we hiked towards the blue, she realized where we were going. "We can't go there," she said, looking scandalous. "Mommy said it was off limits." "Well, Mommy isn't here," said Daniel, "so if you don't want to come, then turn around and go back." Catherine seemed to think about it, but must have decided it was too far to walk back on her own. We were about 2 miles into the woods, and despite her desire to follow us everywhere, Catherine was kind of a scaredy cat. She didn't like being by herself, and it usually led to her getting hurt when she tried to follow us into dangerous situations. She still followed us, but suddenly she was a safe distance away as we made our way towards the blue. When the trees parted and the edges of the pit opened up, we knew we had arrived. "There it is," Clint breathed, the lip coming into view not long after. "So cool." We had seen it a dozen times, but it was always awe-inspiring. The hole was like something punched by a meteor, the edges jagged and uneven. Maybe there was a meteor at the bottom. Maybe it was what made the water so blue, but we had never seen it. Well, not yet. We were only really interested in the bridge that day and cared nothing for the natural beauty. We spent the first few minutes just leaning over the edge and spitting into the water below. We couldn't see when it hit, but we knew it had. If the side had crumbled, we'd have all gone in. Then this story might have been very different. "Let's go on the bridge," one of them said. I think it was Clint, but could have been any of them. It was definitely Carter who agreed, but we all wanted to go. The bridge was what we lived for, the thrill we came back for, and the second my hands touched the ropes of that swinging death trap, I felt the adrenaline begin to pump within me. The bridge was in disrepair from the first time we found it, and it had only gotten worse over the years. It was missing a few boards, the ropes frayed and peeling, and we should have known it was only a matter of time before there was a problem. When we got to the bridge, all of us crowding onto it as we usually did, Henry moved to the front and began swinging it from side to side. The ropes creaked as we all laughed and held on. Henry was quite a bit larger than most of us, and when he rocked the bridge, he really rocked the bridge. It swayed wide over the gap, and we all laughed and joked as we swayed along with it. We'd been cheating death for a couple of minutes when we realized that someone was missing. We looked back towards the lip of the pit and saw Catherine hunkered in the woods. She was miserable, not liking the sight of us trying to throw ourselves into the blue, and didn't seem to want any part of it. We joked and picked at her, but I wish now that I had seen the fear in her eyes and thought better of what we were doing. I should have been a better big brother on that day. "Come on, Cat," Clint said. "No way," Catherine said, grabbing one of the trees like we might try to pull her onto the bridge. "Don't be a scaredy cat," Clint sing-songed, repeating the phrase scaredy cat, again and again as the rest of us picked it up. I didn't pick it up till the last, but I chanted it right along with the rest of them. Catherine was clearly on the verge of tears, but she still had her pride. She stomped over to the bridge, as indignant as anyone could be at 6, but as she came to the edge, she started to look unsure again. Her hands shook as she reached for the ropes, and when Henry stepped out of the way, she walked hesitantly onto the rickety boards of the bridge. Henry closed off her retreat, and she stepped closer to our group as she tried her best not to cry. "All right, Henry, let's get some big swings in this time," Clint trumpeted. Henry seemed all too willing to oblige, and soon the bridge was rocking farther than I'd ever seen it rock before. It was swinging over the blue like a pendulum, and even I was afraid that we might go in. It was pivoting back and forth, the ropes groaning like a ship's mast in a high wind, and I wondered for a moment what it would be like to fall into that blue water. You could only really tread water for so long before you went under, and I wondered how long that would be. Would anyone get back with help before you drowned? I didn't see when Catherine fell off the bridge, but when Henry yelled out a moment later, I looked over and saw her when she hit the blue. She didn't splash, the water just stayed put, and she came up thrashing as she tried to get her head above the crystal blue water. The water must have been thick because she was really struggling to make headway in it. She was calling for help with big, gasping breaths. The bridge had stopped moving, all 5 of us looking down into the chasm and knowing that we were in trouble. We'd been playing where we shouldn't. We had been being stupid, and now someone had gotten hurt. "We've got to go get help," Daniel yelled, and his words were like a starter pistol. I ran for the cabin to try to get help, Daniel and Carter coming with me. I prayed Catherine could tread water while we ran the 20 or so minutes back to the cabin, but I knew that Catherine wasn't a strong swimmer. I didn't expect she would still be treading water by the time we got back, but I prayed to God that she would be. Mom, Aunt Claire, and Aunt Liz were at the table when we ran in, drinking tea and laughing, but they jumped up when we told them what had happened. Mom came running when she heard, grabbing a rope and running along behind us as we went back. My dad and uncle still weren't back from fishing, but Aunt Liz said that she would call emergency services to hopefully get someone down there. The run back took a little longer, all of us winded from the sprint to the cabin, but Catherine had only been in the water for 45 minutes by the time we got back. That wasn't so long, I thought. She could be fine. It turned out it was 45 minutes too long, though. Clint said that she'd gone under about 5 minutes after we'd left, and she hadn't come back up. My mom tied the rope off to a tree, but it was too short to make it down into the blue. She went back for another rope, my aunt staying with us, and by the time she got back, she had emergency services in tow. They brought long ropes and divers, and soon they were in the blue, trying to find her. The diver who went in said the blue was miles deep, and the water was like trying to swim in jello. They went as deep as they dared, but they never found Catherine. My dad and uncles came back from fishing to find my mother inconsolable, and Catherine presumed dead. They didn't have the heart to punish us for what had happened, and all of us said it had been a terrible accident. We left out the part where we'd been rocking the bridge, and they decided that Catherine must have lost her balance and fallen in. They shouted a little that they had told us to stay away from the blue, but they could see how shaken up we were by what had happened. They thought we had been punished enough, but it appeared that something else disagreed. We never went back to Grandpa's cabin again. It held bad memories for the 3 of us, and I don't think any of Dad's siblings went back either. None of my cousins went there willingly again. It held terrible memories for all of us, it seemed, and I think they knew something dark was waiting for us to come back. The first letter showed up 2 weeks after Catherine's funeral. The 2 weeks after we buried my sister were a really bad time for me. I was sad about what had happened to Catherine, but I was also unbelievably riddled with guilt over it. I felt that I had every right to be guilty. I'd played a part in what had happened, but I didn't think I'd been the biggest part. Looking back, my cousins were really the ones that had pushed her to get on the bridge, but I hadn't stood up and tried to protect her either. I'd failed in my duties as a big brother, and she had paid the price. My parents had been talking about back-to-school shopping, something they seemed unwilling to do, and my mother was trying to guilt my father into getting it done. They were both distraught over the loss of Catherine, but my mother had always been a bit of a realist when it came to things. My sister was dead, but I would still have to go to school whether I wanted to or not, and I would need things to begin school with. While they were arguing about it, Mom told me to go get the mail, see if the circular had come in. I think she wanted coupons out of it, but I can't really remember. I would find it hard to remember much about that day when I looked back, except for the letter. I went to the mailbox and found that there was a circular in there. There were also 2 bills, a couple of condolence cards, and a letter in a strange envelope. The envelope felt moist, the paper seeming damp and moldy, and I didn't like to touch it. I started to sandwich it between the condolence cards, and that's when I noticed it had my name on it. From Catherine to Justin Mansley. I felt the other pieces of mail slip from my fingers when I read the name. It couldn't be. Catherine was dead, dragged into the blue by whatever lay below, and there was no way that this letter could be from her. I thought it might be a trick, maybe one of my cousins, but they had all seemed as guilty about what happened to Catherine as I was. Clint hid it behind a constant stream of humor, but he still clearly felt like he needed to hide what he'd done. Like me, he realized that he could get in trouble if they knew that he'd been goofing around, and I didn't think he'd be stupid enough to try to pull something like this. I opened the strange envelope. I didn't want to. I wanted to throw it away, but I had to know what was inside. Even at 12, I knew there was no way it could be from Catherine. Dead people didn't send letters to the living, but I still had to know what was going on. The letter was brief. All of Catherine's letters have been brief. It's your fault. You should be the one in the blue. I just stood there for a moment, looking at the letter. I started to rip it up, thinking again that this was a cruel joke, but something stopped me. It isn't something I can really explain, but tearing that paper felt like tearing pages out of the Bible. It felt fundamentally wrong, and I ended up stuffing it in my pocket instead, as I collected up the mail that I had dropped on the pavement. I couldn't destroy it, but I didn't want my parents to find it either. What would they say if they saw it? Would they know what I'd done? I couldn't risk that. I was in enough turmoil over my sister's death without my parents blaming me for it. I came in and dropped off the mail, sneaking up to my room as I hid the letter in a box of baseball cards under my bed. It wouldn't be the only one soon enough. Over the next 2 months, I got 2 more letters, each on the same day of the month. After the second one, coming about 2 weeks after school started, I started checking the mail every day to make sure the letters didn't get picked up by my parents. I hid them in the same box, each of them reading similar to the one before it. I'm lonely. I miss you. It's your fault. Come to the blue. Come to the blue. Come to the blue. It was October, the leaves already a vibrant orange in the front yard, when Clint called me after I received my 3rd letter. "Are you doing this?" he asked, sounding angry and scared. Sounded like he was shaking something in the background, paper or something, and I asked what he was talking about. "These letters. Carter and I have each gotten 3. If this is you, then you need to stop. We all feel bad about what happened to Catherine, me especially, but this is going to get us in trouble. If one of our parents found those letters, then we could be in serious trouble for what we did. Your sister is gone, man. I'm sorry for it, but this isn't going to bring her back." I knew what he was talking about without having to be told. I told him I'd been receiving them too, and I bet Henry and Daniel had been getting them as well. I still didn't think they were from Catherine. There was no way for dead people to write you letters, but somebody clearly knew what we had done in the woods. Clint said that was impossible. We had been the only ones in the woods that day, or at least the only ones around the blue when Catherine had fallen in. He said it had to be one of us, and before he hung up, he was going to call Daniel to see if he was the one playing bad jokes. He called me back 20 minutes later and said they were just as freaked out as he was. He says he's been dreaming about the blue, and he knows that Henry has too. Henry's talking about the blue a lot these days, and Daniel is scared he's going to tell somebody what really happened. I hadn't thought of that either, but I suppose by then I thought it might be what we deserved. The letters kept coming on the same day of every month, and I realized that it was the same day that Catherine had gone into the blue. We all received our letters on the anniversary of her fall, and as Christmas came around, we all started to worry about Henry. Henry had always been a big boy, looking like a high schooler, even though he was only a year younger than Daniel. But when he came to our house for Christmas, he looked like he'd lost 30 pounds. It also looked like he might be pulling out his hair. He was twitchy, quiet, nothing like the boisterous boy we had seen a few months ago. Daniel told us that when he talked, it was about the blue. He said he dreamed about it, drew pictures of it, and in the pictures, Catherine was floating in it. Henry and Clint had been the last ones to see her alive in all that blue, but in the pictures, she was waving at them from the water. He says in his dreams, she comes out of the blue and tries to get him to jump in. She told him that it's nice down there, it's cool and wonderful, that he would really enjoy it if he were to come join her. He keeps talking about joining her, but I don't know how he would. Dad told Mom that we were never going back to that cabin, not after what happened. They're all really afraid that one of us will fall off that bridge if we went back, Daniel told us as we sat around the kids' table in the den. Henry sat at the table with us, but he did little more than move his fork around in his mashed potatoes, not really eating anything. A couple of months later, my aunt and uncle put Henry in a psychiatric facility. Dad told us he was sick, but Daniel said he'd started having night terrors, and he almost completely stopped eating. He couldn't go to school. He wouldn't play. It was like he just shut down completely. Daniel was afraid to sleep in the same room with him, and he really hoped that whatever this place was they had taken Henry to, that they could fix him. A month after that, Henry broke out of that facility and was never seen again. No one was quite sure how he had gotten out without being seen, but Henry was gone. Everything in the room was exactly the way it had been the night before, including the restraints that were still buckled in the same way they had been when the orderly put him to bed. The police thought for sure that they would find him walking along the road or something, maybe in the woods around the place, but they never did. Uncle Mike and Aunt Liz were devastated, but the four of us were pretty sure we knew where Henry was. They'd never find him, just like they never found Catherine. We were all pretty sure he was in the blue. The facility they put him in was about 30 miles from Grandpa's cabin, but we were still certain that that's where he was. When I got my letter that month, all my questions were answered. Henry came to join me in the blue. You should come and see him. He's much better now. Daniel and Clint called me later that day, and I told them I'd gotten the same news. What are we going to do? Clint asked. I didn't have an answer. Carter went next, though it took him 2 years to do it. Carter was about 2 years younger than Clint, the youngest of the cousins besides Catherine, and he held out only because he and Clint were so close. I don't think Clint's parents ever had any inkling of what was going on with their son, but by Thanksgiving, he was looking the same way Henry had. He was barely eating, and only then because Clint coaxed him. Clint had changed a lot since that summer when we lost Catherine. He had softened a little, and I think he had realized that life was a little more fleeting than he had believed. He said Carter wasn't sleeping, was having nightmares about the blue, and told Clint that Henry was in the dreams too now. Carter was smarter than the rest of us, not that that was saying much, but I think it helped him put off the bad feelings and get through it for a while. Unlike Henry, Carter just looked tired all the time, and when he came to my 14th birthday party that year, the bags under his eyes looked like bruises. It's not as bad as it looks, he told me with a faint smile. My parents sent me to a doctor to get some meds that help. Well, not really help, but they let me sleep. They make it harder to get out of the dreams, though. I asked him about the dreams, and Despite Clint telling me not to make him think about them, Carter said he didn't mind. Daniel and I sat close, like students listening to a lecture, and Carter reeled a bit as he thought about them, not seeming sure how to begin. I'm standing on the bridge. It's nighttime. It's always nighttime in the dreams, and I'm looking down into the blue. It's... He blinked really fast for a few seconds and shook his head before going on. It's glowing in the dreams. It's always glowing. As I stand and look down, Catherine and Henry come up out of the water and wave at me. They tell me to jump. They tell me to join them. They tell me how great it is down there. As they tell me, I kinda wanna jump. His eyes shut for a count of 5 before he jerks awake with a start. I want to go to them. There's no dreams in the blue, no nightmares or letters or anything. It's just peaceful. He leaned over onto Clint and started snoring, and Clint accepted his weight gratefully. Carter nearly made it to my 15th birthday party, and a lot of that was due to Clint. This whole thing brought us all closer together, and we called each other often. Daniel actually came to live with us for a while, his parents having trouble coping with Henry's disappearance. Aunt Liz was eventually put into the same facility that Henry had escaped from after she tried to overdose on sleeping pills, and Uncle Mike soon moved in with us too. He and Daniel looked sad most of the time, but I think they enjoyed having us close. Daniel had started having the dreams a lot more often, but he was 15 and starting high school, and he had other things to occupy his mind. If there was anyone who could have used our help, it was Clint. Clint had started high school too. He and Daniel were a year older than me, but he missed a lot of days while he tried to take care of Carter. Carter was losing his mind at an alarming rate, and Clint confided that he had started strapping him into bed at night. I caught him sleepwalking to the front door, and he fights me when I try to get him back to bed. I don't know how my mom and dad haven't noticed yet, but I may have to tell them soon. He's like a zombie, and I don't know how he makes it through school every day. A week before my 15th birthday, Aunt Claire called to tell us that Carter and Clint had gone missing. They both disappeared in the middle of the night, she said tearfully. I just don't know what to do. The police have no idea, but I'm hoping that maybe they'd gone to your house for some reason and they were safe. My mom said they hadn't, but she and Dad said they would help her look for them. Clint's bike is gone too. I told Dale that Indian Scout was a bad idea, but he swore Clint was responsible and that he wouldn't just up and leave without telling us. Daniel and I were eavesdropping, and he said we both knew where he'd gone. After my parents left to join the search party, we piled into Daniel's Jeep and went to Grandpa's cabin, as little as we wanted to. Uncle Mike had left him the Jeep when he got his driver's license, but this would be the longest trip we had ever made in it. Grandpa's cabin was about 2 hours from my house, and despite having left a note, I was sure my mother would be worried sick. The drive seemed to take forever, and when we pulled up in front of the cabin, we found Clint's motorcycle out front, and we knew what we would find. It was dark when we got to the blue, and Clint was kneeling on the ground as if praying. The dirt beneath his forehead had turned to mud, and he didn't even look up when we approached. I didn't catch him in time, he said through tears. I didn't wake up until the sun was nearly up. By then it was too late. He beat me here by minutes. I don't know how. I tried to catch him, but he was already standing on the edge when I got here. I begged him to come back, but he just pitched over and went into the blue. He was right, he said, pointing. It glows at night. I hadn't even noticed, but as I looked up, I could see it now. The blue was glowing like the iridescent moss you sometimes found in caves. And as I looked down, I thought I saw 3 people swimming down there. They were looking up at me, but I leaned away before they could entice me over. Clint, Daniel said. Clint, we need to go. Go? Clint asked, not seeming sure what he was talking about. Yeah, we need to go. It's too late for Carter, but your mother's worried sick about you. Aunt Claire thinks you and your brother have been kidnapped. Maybe even that the same people got you who got Henry. Let's go back. Let's go back before something happens." "Something already happened," Clint said, his voice husky. "Carter's gone. Henry's gone. And I'm tired of living with these dreams every night. They aren't going to stop until we all go in. And I'm tired of fighting it." "What are you?" Daniel started, but Clint had stood up and sprinted for the lip of the drop before we could stop him. Daniel made a grab for him, but missed completely. We both stepped after him, trying to catch him, but he was over the edge before we could even process what was happening. He didn't splash when he went in, just like Catherine hadn't, and Daniel and I stood there breathing heavily as we watched the still surface of the blue. When he didn't surface, we walked back to the cabin with only the moon to guide us and called our parents. Emergency services came in to dive in the blue again, but Daniel and I just sat there in shock. We've got to get some distance from this," Daniel said. "Maybe if we go where she can't find us, the dreams will stop and we can avoid the same fate as the others did." I asked him if he believed that, and all he could say was it was worth a shot. They sold the cabin after that. My Aunt Claire and Uncle Dale had lost both their kids in one night, and they took it pretty hard. Daniel and I helped each other through the next few years, but when Daniel graduated and said he was taking a job overseas, I could tell that the dreams were starting to get to him. I'd kept my grades up, using the sleepless nights to study, and was eligible for early graduation. I'd been accepted into a college 3 states away, something that broke my mother's heart. Daniel wished me luck. For the next 3 years, we just kind of maintained. The dreams got better with distance, and soon I stopped having them altogether. Daniel told me the same and built a life for himself in South America. After 3 years, I almost forgot about the dreams and the blue, just chalking it up to something remembered wrong from childhood. And as I got closer and closer to graduation, I couldn't wait to start my new life. Then, Aunt Liz died, and Uncle Mike had begged Daniel to come back. Aunt Liz had died of a stroke in her bed, having left the facility years ago. And Uncle Mike was a mess. He had never really gotten over the loss of Henry, and he begged Daniel to come back and help him. Daniel had agreed to come back and help with the funeral preparations, but then he said he had to go back. He invited Uncle Mike to come back with him, saying he could stay with him in South America, but he doubted that he would. "It's only for a couple of weeks, a month tops. I'll be fine," he assured me. Now, he was gone too. As I sit on the floor typing this out, I can hear something I haven't in 3 years. The blue is calling again. Catherine is calling again. I don't know how long I can hold out. Sooner or later, I'll go join the rest of them. Sooner or later, I'll return to the blue. The old guilt is still there. It's always been there. I was a fool to think I could run from it. I should have saved myself the trouble and jumped in the night Clint went in. Now, I'm the last. It's only a matter of time before Catherine gets me, too.
I work as a correctional officer in Stragview Prison. Now, saying that probably brings up all sorts of images and ideas, but just know, the job is very different than what you see on TV. There are no nightly escape attempts, no big throwdowns in the yard every afternoon, and if your inmates are drunk, it's usually because they've been smuggling things out of the kitchen for weeks. The night shift is not generally very exciting, but it does have its quirks. For example, all the guards in confinement knew about the mysterious shower in Quad 2. At first it was just a curiosity to help pass the time, a mystery to be solved, or some bit of annoyance that inmates could complain about ceaselessly. No one could have known how bad it would get in the end. I've been an officer in confinement probably since I got certified. There's a real need for male staff at an all-male facility. Shocking, I know, and the confinement unit is no different. Typically, the crew is small, each filling a desired need. My temperament was thought to be beneficial in a unit generally occupied by hard asses, and so I was assigned to the unit to fill that role. In the 2 years I've been here, I've seen and heard some things that you don't usually see on TV. I've heard hits planned out through the back grates and the windows. I've had all manner of things thrown at me through the flaps, which we push their food or their clothes in through. I've been called some pretty colorful names. I've stumbled across my fair share of bodies, too, hanging or bleeding, which needed immediate medical attention. Shower 5, though, was definitely the weirdest thing I've ever seen. I couldn't begin to tell you why. I doubt anyone could, but sometimes when you put an inmate in Shower 5, they would reappear in Shower 3. For those unfamiliar with how prison quads are set up, let me explain. Each quad holds 28 cells, 14 on the top and 14 on the bottom, accessible by catwalk. There are 5 showers in each quad. Shower 1 and Shower 5 are on either side of the cells 1 and 14. Shower 2 and 4 are on either side of cell 15 and 28. And Shower 3 sits between cell 21 and 22. We shower 2 quads a night, which roughly takes about 3 to 4 hours, and makes up the biggest part of our night. Quad 2's shower night was Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Inmates are cuffed, removed from cells, weighed, given haircuts, and placed in the shower so we can search their cells. They're given roughly 15 minutes to wash and dry off before we come back, cuff them, and return them to their cells. While they're showering, they're locked in a shower cell about the size of, well, a household shower, while we go to the next quad and do pretty much the same thing. Sometimes within that 15-minute window, though, the inmate will close their eyes, to blink or maybe rinse their hair, and suddenly appear in Shower 3. At first, it would happen anywhere from 2 to 4 times a month. It was never anything you could count on. We'd sometimes take bets on when it would happen, too. It never happened in reverse, either. Shower 3 was broken, so we never used it. But when we put an inmate in Shower 3 for holding, he never went anywhere until we were ready for him to go somewhere. The shower was a mystery that provided a much-needed break from a tedious job. For the first 4 months, we laughed at the look of confusion on the inmates' faces who appeared in Shower 3, heads full of shampoo or frantically searching for a towel that wasn't there. It was a fun game, until Inmate Ferris disappeared. Inmate Ferris was one of the few who didn't request Shower 5 every shower night. The other inmates fought like cats to get that stall, and I'd come into the quad many nights to the sound of them bickering about who would get it tonight or trying to trade their breakfast trays for someone's spot in the line. One inmate, in particular, Inmate Garvey, used to sell his breakfast tray for their place in the line if it would get him into Shower 5. He showered there 9 nights out of 10, and still never had it happen to him. One night in particular, we had just packed him away and put the next man in Shower 5, only to return to find Shower 3 occupied, Shower 5 empty, and Inmate Garvey pouting like an angry child. They all tried, but, in truth, less than half of them ever got to experience it, and none of them got to experience it like Inmate Ferris did. When it came time for Ferris to go, he said he wasn't going to go to Shower 5. Usually this wouldn't have been a problem. There were always tons of others willing to go in his place. But tonight, Ferris was my last shower. Garvey immediately started hooting about wanting to take his place, but we ignored him. On that night, all I was thinking about was the food waiting for me in the fridge and the prospect of being done with another shower night. There was also the matter of Ferris's smell. Ferris had been refusing his shower for the last 7 shower nights. The other shift didn't quite enforce the rules like we did about bathing once a week, and the administration had begun to notice Ferris's odor. They had sent down the order after their latest inspection that Ferris would shower tonight, on his own or with assistance. Look, Ferris, you're going in that shower. It's the only one I have available, and you're my last shower. I ain't going in that shower. He said it evenly as he stared at me through the glass door. Purvis started walking towards us, but I waved him off, not wanting to spook Ferris and create a situation where there didn't need to be one. Look, Ferris, we can do this the easy way or the hard way. If you refuse this shower, I can get a bunch of angry men to come down here and pull you out and put you in the shower. Or you could be an adult and go take your shower, and we can be done with this. What's it gonna be? He argued a bit more, but in the end, he put on the cuffs and went to Shower 5 meekly enough. I always kinda regret making him go. He was praying when I closed the shower door. He was very religious, and a shower that made people vanish was something he neither trusted nor understood. I closed him in and took off his cuffs. At first, I didn't think he was going to shower at all. As I descended the stairs, though, I heard the water start and decided to make a trip to the officer station for a quick bite. The crisis had been averted, and now it was time for a well-deserved reward. 15 minutes later, I returned to find 3 occupied showers and 2 empty showers. Well, not exactly empty. Ferris's towel was still hanging off the door, and his soap dish was still sitting on the ledge. Of inmate Ferris, though, there was no sign. Purvis looked around, not quite understanding what had happened, and wondered out loud if we'd filled all the showers before we left. I said we had, and Purvis and I spent the next hour searching every shower, every cell on the quad, and every cell and shower in every other quad for good measure. We checked the CCTV in the station, but there was no video of him leaving the shower. The video showed him showering 1 minute and gone the next. The strange shower hadn't disappeared Ferris to a different shower this time. It had simply disappeared him. The next 3 days were a nightmare. Ferris's disappearance prompted emergency search of all dorms, a compound-wide lockdown, the dispatching of the K-9 team, and a county-wide manhunt that extended into neighboring counties before it was finally called off after a fruitless 2 weeks. For 3 days, we were questioned, had to make multiple written and verbal statements, and were grilled endlessly by the local and federal officers. The cameras clearly showed that we had been absent from the quad when Ferris had disappeared, so after 3 days, they had no choice but to let us return to work. We weren't sure what to make of the incident, but we chalked it up as the strangeness of Shower 5 and went back to work as usual. We didn't use Shower 5 anymore, though. It seemed like the strange magic had finally turned sour. We even called in a favor and had maintenance come down to fix Shower 3, which meant we still had 4 showers in Quad 2. We didn't see Ferris for another 3 months. I've said we a lot in this story, but I haven't really talked about the men I served with in confinement. Purvis was our muscle, 6 feet tall and built like a barrel. I'm pretty sure all the inmates thought he communicated through grunts and the occasional go to hell. If you weren't an inmate, though, he was one of the nicest guys you'd ever care to know. I've spent many afternoons on his back porch with a beer in my hand and the smell of steaks on the grill, chatting with the third member of our trio, McCann, while Purvis grilled. McCann, Sergeant McCann that was a 10-year vet who'd spent most of his time doing paperwork and fielding questions from the brass. He let us handle most of the day-to-day drudgery while he insulated us in a warm blanket of correctly managed reports and accurately maintained logs. McCann was far from what you'd call imposing, standing about 5'2" with thick glasses and a slim frame, but he was knowledgeable about his job and always had something to talk about. He was the last sergeant I ever served with in that confinement unit. 3 months passed and Ferris's disappearance was starting to fade. After the inquiry and the inquest determining whether or not we'd had something to do with the disappearance, they put us back in confinement and told us to keep a closer watch in the future. We talked about it sometimes, speculating on what had happened to him, but ultimately we lost interest after the paperwork ended and the hype died down. He was gone, and we still had a job to do. The showers went on, days turned into weeks. It was Sunday when Ferris finally came back. Sundays were pretty easy in confinement. We didn't do showers on Sunday night. The night was spent cleaning and passing out toiletries and generally just finding something online to watch so we could run out the clock. We brought food in to share most Sundays, and this one was no exception. I brought chicken, Purvis brought soda, and McCann brought a pecan pie his sister had made. By 9 o'clock, we had caught up on our paperwork, passed out our toiletries, and we were full as ticks and ready to find a movie. I had my feet kicked up on the desk and was just getting ready to enjoy a nap when the sound of boots on doors started in Quad 2. McCann looked up from the screen and sighed. I knew it was too good to be true. We headed out into the quad to see what all the kicking was about. As Purvis and I came to the door, we were buffeted by the screams of, "Shower 3!" and "It's Purvis! He's dying!" We came up the stairs 2 at a time, and what I saw will haunt me until the day I die. I'd seen men get hurt in the line of work, I'd seen men get stabbed, and I'd watched a few men die, but I had never seen anything to top this level of cruelty. It was Ferris, all right. We'd arrived in time to see his last few breaths and listen to him wheeze as his lungs finished filling with blood. He lay on the dirty shower floor, his blood pooling as it tried to flow into the drain, and shuddered out his last seconds of life. He was naked, and we were saved having to look at his mutilated genitalia because of the fetal position he'd taken. A nurse would later tell us that He had been cut and sliced cruelly before he died, and his stomach and intestines were a mess of punctured tissue. We didn't know about this until later, but what we could see was horrific enough. His skin had been sliced by long claws, and his back looked as though someone had tried to peel him a strip at a time. His arms, legs, neck, face, and especially his back were in bloody tatters, and when he finally died, I considered it a mercy. "Go get the Sarge," Purvis said, and as a man with the shortest time in, I was relegated to the bubble while McCann went to the floor to assess the situation. They took Ferris out under a sheet, and it was dripping red in its wake. This started a whole new bombardment of paperwork. CCTV footage was combed over a frame at a time, witness statements were taken, and dispositions were written. Luckily, we had done our rounds on time. One of us was on camera not even 30 minutes before he'd appeared in the shower. It was agreed that the incident had been no negligence of ours. The narrative they constructed was an unsatisfying one, but it kept our bacon out of the fire, so we didn't argue. Ferris had managed to worm his way into the grates through the showers and had made it to the ventilation system. The other inmates had likely been feeding him and telling him when to stop moving. This was before audio was normal in the dorms, so we couldn't check to see if they were talking to him. After 3 months, he'd gotten bored and wandered into one of the big fans and gotten cut up. He drug himself back into the shower 3 this time, and called for help. That's where we had found him. No inmates admitted to having talked to Ferris since he disappeared, and no blood was ever found in the vents. But this was a much better narrative than a shower that kept sending inmates from one shower to another. Sometimes, administration just wants paperwork to look good. Making sense was secondary. After that, no inmate would go near Shower 5. It spread the compound seemingly overnight, and any inmate that came into Quad 2 would refuse to go into that shower. We were more than happy to oblige this request. One more weird occurrence and they'd pull us all out and separate us between the other dorms. We all liked being where we were, and we were in no hurry to get sent somewhere else. For the next few months, we kept a low profile and tried our best to keep the disturbances to a minimum. If we needed a reminder of the incident, all we had to do was look at the red stains on the floor of Shower 3, the ones that no amount of scrubbing could get rid of. We managed to keep the weirdness to a minimum for about a month, before it came completely off the rails. Purvis and I were conducting showers in 3 and 4 when they brought in our latest wild child. Everett was what we'd call a frequent flyer. Had we known he was coming in, we'd have put him in the cell we'd just released him from 3 days ago. He'd gotten into another fight, probably over gang politics, and now he was sitting in the sally port again, cussing up a storm. When they asked us where we wanted him, we didn't even think about Shower 5. We told them to just put him in a shower on the other side and we'd deal with him later. I don't know if he said something to them or not, but they later told us that they loaded him into Shower 5, leaving the cuffs on because he was being combative. We finished showers later that night. Just about the time my butt hit the chair, I remembered Everett. I haven't heard a peep out of him. Did they load him into a cell? McCann looked at his board and shook his head. Pretty sure they put him in a shower. A quick look through the glass told us that he wasn't in one of the ground floor showers. How could he be? We had used all the bottom showers to shower other quads. When I asked them why they had put him in Shower 5, they answered that it had been funny to watch him piss his pants in fear of the mystery shower. It was less funny after the events of that night. We were preparing to go put him away when a chorus of screams brought our attention to the quad. Inmates were screaming, terrified wails that only the doomed are capable of, and the whole quad was going nuts. We could all see the door to Shower 5 heaving and buckling as something slammed into it with a machine-like rhythm. That wasn't like any kicking I'd ever heard, and added to the screaming, it put me on edge. Shower 5 had become something sinister, something not altogether understandable, and I did not want to see what new horror it had in store for us. I started to move, despite my apprehension, but McCann stopped me. "I've got this. Call the captain and get some help down here while we see what's going on." His action saved my life that day. Sometimes I wish it hadn't. He and Purvis left the station in a hurry, piling up at the door as they hunted for keys. They came through the door, one behind the other, as they mounted the steps in a flurry of motion. They were at the top of the stairs and heading towards the shower when the door buckled outward. That door was reinforced metal, and whatever was on the other side had separated it from the hinges. The hinge hung lamely, concrete still clinging to it, as something dark and groping tried to climb through the hole. The snapping mouth glistened in the overhead lights as the creature scrambled and pushed to be free of the prison. I saw Purvis take a step back, bumping into McCann as the two tried to process what was happening. All thoughts of calling for help had fled me as I watched the events unfold. The creature freed itself from the hole, black goo glistening on the torn door, and made its way up the wall with a hellish shriek and a metallic clitter I could hear through the glass. The whole quad had started to scream, and their hellish chorus was only drowned out by the creature's scream of pain as it left its glistening trail behind it on the concrete wall. The two officers, my friends, stood like statues as the thing swung its eyeless head from side to side. It seemed to be confused by all the screaming, the sound bouncing off the concrete, and I thought they might escape as Purvis took another tentative step backward. That's when McCann started screaming. I'd seen McCann face the most hardened of inmates, seen him hold the line during the last summer's riots as we held the gate against a dozen screaming inmates. But this creature was too much for him. He screamed, and it cut across the hellish sound of the quad like a knife through butter. The creature then turned its eyeless face towards him, and the front of its bulbous mouth split open to reveal lines of serrated teeth. It loosed a high-pitched sound like a piece of farm equipment stripping its gears, and leapt, coming stickily off the wall. Its path took it straight into Purvis, who was frozen in front of the screaming sergeant. It rode him to the ground, knocking McCann off his feet, and the strange mouth ripped itself open to reveal rows of glistening black teeth. Its mouth dove, and it tore chunks of flesh out of the screaming man as McCann scooted backwards in a state of sheer terror. He reached for his gas, the small can of chemical spray that is usually our best defense against aggressive inmates, but his hand seemed unsure how to break the seal that held it in the holster, or even whether or not he wanted to. The creature, meanwhile, was wolfing down gobbets of the quickly exsanguinating Purvis. Purvis was not a small man. I had seen him lay hands on men who would have given me trouble, and put them on their faces as easily as someone subduing a child. Purvis was straining against the thing as it tore bloody strips out of his shirt, his undershirt, and his chest, but his biceps were losing purchase, and he was starting to weaken. The creature raised its muzzle all at once and bit down on his face, engulfing the man's head in a single bite. As Purvis kicked and thrashed under it, I saw McCann get to his feet and run for it. The catwalk had 2 points of egress, and McCann seemed to think that if he could get to the other side, he could elude the creature and put the solid steel door between them. He almost did it, too, until the creature looked up from the stripped skull it was chewing on and heard him running down the stairs. It leapt, frog-like, and hit one of the overhead caged lights as it swung drunkenly before falling to the concrete with a shower of glass and twisted bars. As it fell, the creature leaped off it and caught McCann in the back as he ran for the door. The door is framed with 2 large glass windows that stand about 25 feet high, so you can glance out at the quad and see what's happening at any given time. The creature slammed into McCann and plastered him against one of these windows like a bug. His nose broke, his glasses shattered, and as he slid down, I could follow his progress with the trail of blood he left. The only thing visible was one hand, spasmodically grasping at the impenetrable barrier between him and his freedom as the creature devoured him. I didn't know what to do. I just stood there with the phone in one hand, dial tone blaring at me, and the radio in the other hand, putting out the same good-natured chatter as it usually does this time of night. It was so weird to think there were people having normal nights somewhere else on the compound. While my 2 best friends were being devoured before my eyes, there were actually people out there having comfortable nights filled with nothing more pressing than a bellyache or an unruly inmate who wouldn't go to bed. It didn't even seem possible that our universe could be in the same plane of existence. I think that's when my mind snapped. Or maybe it was when I looked up from the radio and saw the creature looking at me, its eyeless face staring straight at me, that my mind simply unraveled. I let the phone slip out of my hand, let the radio clatter to the desk, and I simply curled in a ball on the floor. I don't know how long I was there, but when I came back to myself, the captain was shaking me, and all hell had truly broken loose. They had come in after I didn't answer the radio. They had used the emergency keys to come into the station and found me on the ground in a catatonic state. They had looked out to see the blood splattered on the windows and feared that a riot was underway. They had assembled their response team, a 7-man team with riot gear, and proceeded into the quad. As I looked out into the shadowy hellscape, I could see that several of the cells had been opened somehow, and there was a lot more blood on the floor than I remembered. The remains of body armor and broken shotguns lay everywhere, and the lights in the quad seemed to be in a constant state of flicker. The team had gone in and been attacked by what they thought was a mountain lion. They had been ripped to shreds in a matter of minutes. Only the team leader had managed to escape after throwing a flash grenade in the thing's face. It had batted the door a little while trying to get at him, but had eventually gone back to eating the remains of the 6 other members. The team leader said it looked like some of the inmates had been killed, though he couldn't figure out how it had been getting into the cells. They looked to me for answers, but I had none. The team leader joined me in a fetal ball in the corner, while the captain made calls for backup. I sat in that station for the next 2 days, nodding off when sleep finally took me, and watching as the state police and animal control tried to figure out how to get this thing out of the quad. After the 3rd police officer was ripped to shreds, we got a visit from someone higher up. The warden came into the station, looking nonplussed and calm as ever. He had a sit-down with the captain and the chief of the state police, who had made my station his command center. He told us that the quad was to be quarantined until further notice, the reflection on his glasses making him look as inhuman as the creature. No one was to go in or out until this thing was dead. Captain asked him what we should do about the men trapped inside, men who hadn't eaten in 2 days, and he simply shrugged and said if they were in there, then they were as good as dead already. That thing isn't going to let anyone out once it's in there, and a rescue attempt isn't going to do anything but lose you more men. Don't worry, though. We'll make it so no one who's gone through the door ever existed. The warden led the chief out after that, and all the state police went with him. It was just us in our own little world again after that. He was true to his word, too. McCann and Purvis were unmarried bachelors, so they just disappeared one day after work. Of the 27 inmates who'd been in that quad, I don't know. Their files were gone when I came back, their DC numbers and CDC records expunged, and all the cells were open and empty. The doors to Quad 2 have been sealed shut, the doors welded closed, and caution tape has been draped across it. I was offered McCann's position as confinement sergeant, and I took it. I didn't take it because I wanted it, but because I felt like it was my sacred trust to guard against that thing every night. I've never seen it during the day. It doesn't seem to like the light, but at night you can catch glimpses of it in the darkness as it stalks the rats and roaches that still live out in the quad. The new officers they put back here always ask me what happened in Quad 2, but I never tell them the whole story. If they knew, they might try to get in and get its attention, adding more blood to my hands. I've seen officers come and go in the last 10 years, but I haven't told anyone about the incident. My captain's a major now, at another facility. Everyone from my old shift has either quit or moved on. I alone keep my vigil here every night. Sometimes I see him in the semi-darkness, looking at me, thinking. After 10 years, I imagine he's hungry for something more than rats. Maybe in another 10, he'll question how thick that glass is between him and the real meat. When he does, I'll be here. They think I'm crazy, but I know something is trying to get me. What you're feeling is normal anxiety. Stick with your medication. Keep your appointments. We can help you get over these paranoid feelings. Pfft, my therapist says it's all in my head, but I know better. Paranoia didn't try to kill me when I was 4. When I was 4, I nearly drowned in the bathtub. We had a little old grungy plastic tub in my parents' bathroom, where I took my baths usually. I can remember it vividly. Tub full of suds, my mother reading a paperback on the toilet as she observed me at play, my boat and my duck bobbing happily on the surface. I was pretending my duck was a sea monster. It stalked the boat through the foam and the bubbles when the phone rang in the hallway and my mom left to get it. She was gone for a minute, maybe, but that was all it took. My duck attacked the boat, dragging it under the water, and I submerged as well, closing my eyes and dropping below the soapy water. Then, as my duck battered the ship under the warm deluge, I felt something wrap its hands around my shoulders. I struggled for a minute, confused, suddenly terrified, and as the breath puffed out of my lungs, I felt myself dragged deeper than our bathtub had ever been. I kicked and struggled, and when something else wrapped around my neck, I bit it. My mother dragged me out of the bath, my teeth still clenched on her arm. If she hadn't saved me, I would have drowned then and there. That was the first time, but it was far from the last. I was terrified of baths after that. I was afraid that something would get me if I ever got in the tub again. That's not to say I never bathed. My mother was still insistent that I have a bath, so, I didn't become the smelly kid in class. I would fight her on baths, refusing to sit in the tub or even entertain the idea of getting close to it. Finally, she would just throw me, clothes and all, into the tub. There I would wash as quickly as possible and jump back out. I would always wash my hair in a frantic, fitful way, but I always felt like something was watching me while I did it. I could feel it creeping up on me, and I was always shaking when I opened my stinging eyes to look behind me. I quickly learned to take showers, and for a while, I felt relief. This appeased my mother. As long as I was bathing, she didn't care how it happened. I would still take as little time as possible, but I still felt those eyes on me whenever I showered. I could feel something slimy, something hateful, sitting on the corner of the tub or peeking at me from the drain, just waiting for its chance. I would glance around, trying to see it as the shampoo stung my eyes, but there was never anything there. I lived like this for years, afraid of something that watched me as I showered. Finally, it got to the point where I could almost feel its eyes on me while I lay in bed, the bathroom door joining to my bedroom. I would close it, sometimes even propping a chair underneath it, but I would still lie awake and swear I could feel those eyes staring at me. I could feel them when I went to the bathroom too, and it finally became too much to handle. I was 13 when I finally told my parents about it. I was sitting on the couch shivering in my towel as I cried and cried, pouring my heart out to them. I told them about the thing that had tried to get me when I was young. I told them I thought I was going crazy, feeling those eyes all the time. I told them I couldn't function anymore, and that I didn't know how much longer I could live like this. This fear bubbling up inside me like soap suds. They took me to a psychiatrist, because of course they did, feeling I might be a danger to myself. They weren't wrong. I was quickly approaching the point where my anxiety and my paranoia would have driven me towards something drastic. The psychiatrist listened, made notes, and told me that it sounded like I had a classic case of scopophobia. Since I'd been suffering from these fears since I was small, he put me on medication and suggested that my parents monitor me for any changes in behavior. His diagnosis brought on the most comfortable week of my life and nearly led to my death. The pills calmed me down, evened me out, allowed me to live outside my anxiety for the first time since I was 4. I could walk into the bathroom. I could sleep with the bathroom door open and no longer feel penetrating eyes on me as whatever stalked the bathroom watched me. My parents commented after the first week about how much calmer I seemed to be, how much happier. And that was when I made a colossal miscalculation. I decided to take a bath, something I hadn't done since I was 4, something I will never do again. It was something I decided on after a sudden whim. I was washing my face in the sink, getting ready to settle into bed, when I saw the bathtub in the mirror and thought how nice it would be to sit in the tub and read as the bubbles popped fragrantly around me. So I filled the tub with hot water, poured in a packet of bubble bath my mom kept under the sink. I watched the bubbles rise higher and higher and flipped off the water as it reached the appropriate level. Then I slid out of my comfortable sleep clothes and stepped into the luxurious folds of the warm water. I buried myself in the warm deluge, the bubbles enveloping me, and I leaned my head back against the towel I had rolled up. For almost a minute, I felt completely at ease. For that moment, I was completely at peace. As I sat there, letting the heat rise and steam around me, I never felt the insidious fingers as they crept around my throat. I was so at peace that I never felt the bobbing as something disturbed the water around me, getting into position. My eyes closed. I never saw whatever it was that loomed above me, preparing to throttle me into the warm water of my last bath. I opened my eyes for just a second as those strong hands wrapped around my neck and made eye contact with the source of my terror. It was thin, an emaciated corpse with blue-black skin that looked like fresh bruises. It was bald, its head gleaming wetly, and its face was all bones and sinew. Its arms were long, unnaturally long, its skin nearly breaking as its thin arms seemed to bulge with water damage. It was naked, but its waist was submerged beneath the water, thankfully. If its body was grotesque, then its teeth were the true horror. Its face was set in a rictus of a smile, its sharp little piranha teeth straining against each other as it throttled me. It was like he was smiling and wincing all at once. Then it fell backwards, and I fell along with it as we sank into the tub. The soapy water surrounded me, enveloping me in a warm, embryotic embrace as we sank into the bath that had been barely 3 feet deep a moment ago. It continued to choke me, its fingers digging into my skin as it tried to pull me closer so it could bite me with those sharp little teeth. It opened its mouth, my struggling sending bubbles up into the watery void, and I could see the teeth stained with something red, something gritty. I swung my fist at him, my hand slow as it cut through the water, and as my lungs burned, I think I really thought I was going to die right then and there. As he pulled me close, I curled my legs back and gave one drastic last endeavor to stay alive. I kicked my feet out into its stomach, and as the bubbles exploded out of its fanged maw, I turned my head and swam skyward for my life. My arms churned up the water, my legs sending me rocketing towards the surface, and all the while, I could feel it cutting up the water behind me. I dared not look behind me. I would see that thing swimming, its teeth flared and its long arms chewing up the distance, and I'd freeze. I could see a small oval of light hanging in the murky distance, and as I swam as fast as I could towards it. My legs burned and my arms ached. My legs felt like they were constantly connecting with something as they struck out frantically. I surfaced amidst the bubbles, tearing myself out of the tub and falling wetly on the bathroom floor. That's where my parents found me, screaming and sobbing as I huddled in the corner. This is the first time in 7 days I've had the use of my hands. My parents had me committed that night, committed for my own good. I spent the first night screaming and pulling at my restraints. There was no toilet in the room. I had been catheterized so that I wouldn't need to be unrestrained, but the room did have a drop sink near the back wall so the staff could wash their hands or refill the water cup when I wanted to drink. I've watched that sink for the last week, feeling its eyes on me as it peeks up from the drain. I watched it as it tried to lift the drain out, its fingers pressing thickly into the slits in the drain cover. Then it poked a long, probing finger from the tip of the spout. When it found that it couldn't come out through either of those means, it just sat in the drain and stared at me, its teeth making maddening little scrapes on the wall of the pipes as it just waited for its chance. It would always disappear when the staff were there, but I knew what I had seen. Hallucinations don't try to throttle you in the tub. It's watching me now as I write this. Keeping a journal is supposed to help me get over this, but I find myself just wanting to get all this down before something happens to me. It's only a matter of time before someone notices how badly I stink and they make me shower. If I'm lucky, they'll leave someone to make sure I don't hurt myself in there. If I'm not, they'll give me some privacy and this sneaky little bugger will have his shot. I don't know if I have the strength to hold him off again, but I intend to fight it every league of the way.
When I was in high school, I had a job at a local fast food chain. I worked there for 4 years, freshman year right up until I left for college. and I'd be lying if I said I didn't have some good times there. Holidays are spent together because we don't have much of a choice. Managers who were either good people or just entertaining to work with, coworkers who really became more like friends the longer you were there, and everything in between. I'm not going to say the whole 4 years was great, but it was an experience that I wouldn't trade for anything. Hell, I think everyone should have to work fast food for at least a few months. Gives you a little bit of perception on the guy behind the counter. The chain I worked for was unique in many ways. They were one of the few who let people host events in the lobby. We had a small concert there once for a local metal band, which made for some entertaining times. We had a policy to hire 14-year-olds under special circumstances, which got us into trouble more than once, due to 14-year-old girls flirting with much older guys. This led to allegations of underage hookups in the back room. They had a weird rehabilitated cons program that hired ex-cons fresh from prison too. That one worked really well with the aforementioned hiring 14-year-olds policy, and also led to a couple of guys robbing the store after getting off shift. I don't even think they bothered to take their name tags off, so they were pretty easy to catch. One of my favorites, though, was our 24-hour program, which ran pretty much every summer that I worked there. You see, since I was under 18, I wasn't allowed to work past 10 on a school night, but during the summer, I could work as late or as early as I wanted, and I took full advantage of this to fill my pockets with cash. As you may have guessed, this program added a third shift to the usual 2-shift schedule, and it was a 12-hour shift to boot. You'd come in at 6 p.m., just as the dinner rush was ramping up, and work until 6 a.m. when the openers were coming in for their second cup of coffee. The hours were shit, and the pay still wasn't great. No pay differential for late shifts. But what made it worthwhile was the 4-hour lull in between 1 a.m. and 5 a.m. You might have to churn out some cheeseburgers or chicken nuggets for a bunch of drunk college kids, or a carload of stoners who might wander in wanting nuggets, but for the most part, you just kept the store clean and kinda hung out. It was usually a light crew too, and on the night the story takes place, I had a good bunch of guys with me. I'd gotten my friend a job there that year. We'll call him Ryan, cause he might read this. He and Trevor were on the grill that night. I was running the drive-thru window, and my favorite manager was watching the store, a guy named Joseph. Joseph was one of those rare managers that didn't have his head crammed up his ass, and gave just enough of a shit to fly under the radar. He was a cool guy. I sometimes wonder whatever happened to him. Anyway, it had been a long night to say the least. The dinner rush was particularly bad, so as it starts to die down, we picked over the old food in the warming box and went to the break room to hang out. Some managers frowned on this, some would even write you up for it, but Joseph was cool and genuinely liked most of us. The lobby doors were locked at midnight to keep the weirdos out, and with the headset turned up so I could hear if a car rolled into the drive-thru, we started eating old cheeseburgers and swapping stories. The stories started pretty blandly. This thing that happened or that thing that someone had heard about, but finally we fell into creepy stories about stuff we had experienced. I told them about the weirdo in our parking lot a few years ago who'd creeped a bunch of people out before the cops arrived. They found his wife's head in the passenger seat, along with a giant bloody machete. We thought he meant to rob or murder us, but it turns out he was just having a nervous breakdown in our parking lot after offing his old lady. Trevor tried to top it with a story about the time he'd been drinking with his cousin out in a cornfield, but none of us believed him. He said the old farmer had come out in the cornfield, slasher flick style, and screamed at them to get off his property while chasing them with a pitchfork. We piled in the truck and sped off, but something hit the back tailgate hard. Well, we didn't stop till we got to my cousin's house, and what we saw when we got out was the last thing we expected. He paused for dramatic effect. "What was it?" said Ryan, after Trevor had milked it for a little too long. "A pitchfork. The guy had thrown a pitchfork and stuck it right in the tailgate of the truck. If it had been a little higher, it would have come through the back rear glass and took all three of us right in the back of the head." He paused again like this should have been a dramatic revelation, but Ryan and I both shared a look like we doubted most of this had actually happened. When Joseph spoke up from the doorway, all three of us jumped. He'd been counting down the safe, so he hadn't been there for the start of the spooky stories. but it appeared he had come in just in time to catch the tail end of Trevor's story. Joseph was older than all three of us, a guy in his 30s with a wife and kids, and we often forgot that when we were hanging out because of how naturally he related to us. He was an avid gamer who did all the cool stuff we all hoped we'd be doing when we were adults. Right then, though, he had a decidedly dad look on his face as he addressed our little gathering of storytellers. "I've got a story for you guys," he said, spinning a chair around and sitting in it with his arms folded over the back. "And it's a true story, too. You want to hear it?" We did, and he began. I was working at the downtown store at the time, living in this dingy little apartment with my wife. We were broke, and she was pregnant and out on maternity leave. I was finishing up my bachelor's degree during the day, so nights were all I could count on to pay the bills. This was before the owner started up the third shift, or I'd have been all over that. So there I was, working the 3 to 11 shift, busting my hump, and we had a real hard-ass manager who kept us late almost every night, usually unpaid overtime, since we couldn't clean it right the first time, apparently. So most nights, I was lucky to get out of there about 12:30. The night in question had been especially bad, and I didn't get permission to leave until almost 1 in the morning. It was Friday night, though, so I knew I could sleep up until shift tomorrow if I needed to. Picking up my bag, I started trudging home through the chilly January air. Now, I know it rarely gets cold here, being Florida and all, but that winter had been particularly bad. They had all talked about snow more than once, and it had obliged us by dumping a semi-solid sheet of slush all over the place the night before. Most of it was off the road, but the wind was howling at me as I pulled my coat tight and walked up the deserted center of the road. Now, downtown is usually party central, unless you feel like driving to the beach, but tonight it was so cold that even the bars and coffee shops and all-night diners had shuttered their faces and gone to bed. The streetlights were on, and the sewer grates were belching steam up into the cold night. The whole scene looked pretty creepy to me. So, I'm walking up the center of the road, and there's a damn good reason I'm doing that too, in case you were wondering. I was made aware of Stephen King's It from a very young age, and it had given me a real phobia about sewer drains. I didn't want to walk too close because, even with all that hard-won 23 years of wisdom I had, I just knew that on a cold, lonely night like tonight, I would get a taloned hand around my ankle and a quick trip into the sewer if I stepped too close to those smoking holes. So I walked right up the center of the street, as far from the grates as I could, and that particular night, it led me into trouble. So I'm walking up the center line, boots clomping on the asphalt, as I made my way through this way too quiet street. That's when I heard a noise. I thought at first it was the sound of steam escaping the grates. It was a hissing noise, after all, but when it came again, I heard it for what it was. You remember in grade school when some kid behind you wants to pass a note, so he makes that psst sound at you to get your attention? Well, that's what this sound was, a psst sound from the left side of the road. So I turn around, but I don't see anyone. I start walking again, and that same psst sound comes again from the left side of the road. I squinted at the dark alley between two buildings, getting ready to start flying if someone comes running out to mug me. But it's empty. That's when I heard it again. This time, somebody says something in a low voice, too. It sounds like, "Psst, hey buddy," followed by that sound again. Psst, psst. Then I look down, and, I kid you not, there is a face in the drainage grate. As the steam comes curling up around it, I see a midnight black face looking out at me, and the only thing I can make out is its eyes, and they look fucking huge. I booked it. I start running, but as I run, I hear the voice behind me, shouting for me to come back. Then I realize the voice isn't behind me anymore. I glance to my left, and I see that it's following me from the openings of the sewer grates. Loud feet are slapping on the stone down there, and he's trying to get my attention. That's when I hear him yell real loud and fall with a watery splash. I didn't slow down in the least bit, but I saw the black ice a little too late when I turned back around. I hit it. My feet shot straight up and out from under me. I fell back hard against the pavement, and I was pretty sure I had broken my elbow when I came down hard on the concrete. At the time, I was trying to make my head stop spinning as the black spots danced around. I struggled up to my elbow, wincing as I got up on my hurt one, just as the spots started to go away. That's when I saw something that made my blood run cold. "What?" I asked, unable to help myself, wrapped up so deeply until at that moment I had barely realized I was breathing. The manhole cover, not 5 feet away, was coming up, and the face is looking out at me. I tried to get up, and I slipped again as this dripping, oozing thing climbed out of the opening. He towers over me from my prone position, and I start pushing with my legs as I slide away from him. He comes out oozing and quivering from the dark tunnel, and in my mind, he is the apotheosis of every shadowy creature from every horror movie I have ever seen. He is the creature from the Black Lagoon. He is it, the blob, and he's coming to drag me back down into the darkness so he can slowly devour me. His foot slaps down hard on the concrete as he menaces towards me. I'm still trying to slide away on my butt, my elbow starting to cry out now, and when my low back hits the curve, I just froze there as this creature from the midnight cinema towers over me, its oozing flesh dripping onto the concrete. It takes large, ponderous steps as it moves in on me, and at this point, I'm so gripped with fear I can't even move. Its flesh falls to the ground in gooey plops, and after 1,000,000 years crammed into 5 seconds, it's standing not 3 feet away from me. It bends its mountainous head down towards me, and in a gravelly voice, it says the last 3 words I figured I would ever hear, and they're the last 3 words I ever expected to hear from a creature like this. At this point, he looks at us, his mask of pent-up terror melting into a creepy smile, the creepiest smile I've ever seen, as he gravels out, "Got a light?" We sat, dumbfounded, for nearly 15 seconds before Trevor sputters, "What?" Joseph laughs. He asked if I had a light. It turns out he was a homeless guy who'd been living in the sewers to stay warm. He had gotten himself a pry bar so he could hook it under the lid, and he'd been staying in the sewers at night where it was warm. He had no clue why it was so steamy down there, but it was a great place to sleep, when the alternative was freezing your ass off in the park, or down by the pier with the other vags. When I asked him why he was covered in what I hoped was mud, he said that he'd been chasing after me, trying to get a lighter to spark a cigarette. Then he'd fallen in a muddy slush puddle and gotten covered in the stuff. I laughed and handed him the lighter out of my bag, an old Zippo my old man had given me, and considered it a fair trade for a great story. I've told that story so many times over the years, and it never gets old. We laughed about that story and Joseph's deadpan way of building it up right until the very end, for years to come. I've begged him to retell it 150 times, and it never gets old. So if you're ever downtown on a cold night and someone tries to get your attention from the closest sewer grate, just remember that it's probably some vagrant trying to stay warm and have a smoke. And if they drag you down into the sewer for a slow process of digestion, then I guess I was wrong, wasn't I?